I was told by another source. And all of this got me thinking. I haven't done a full sales advice update for a while, and so let's also do that now that I've finally told you how all GPUs are selling in today's market. High-end is falling apart. Some high-end GPUs are dropping in price quite a bit. You can see the RTX 4080 Super going below MSRP right now. Even some nice models not even demanding much of an over MSRP premium, but then others are stubbornly still overpriced, I would say, for where we are in this generation. And so, yeah, I want to answer that, and basically, I want to pose the question in this video and then answer it for you. Should you be waiting for RDNA 4 and or NVIDIA Blackwell? Or really, who should be waiting for either one? Or who should just be buying right now? And in addition to that, in this video, I'm also going to leak a rebate scheme that I am told by multiple sources is one of the major reasons a debt meteor hit AMD's gaming revenue in the past quarter. But first, an ad from a sponsor. Inspired by the dark side of the moon, the SharGeek 170 is an awesome power bank with a supreme charging experience. 70. Buying it through this link directly supports Moore's Law is dead, and it gets you a really cool, although I believe early 5080 volume will be bad if it launches early in quarter 4 or late in quarter 3, and that 5090 volume will be bad throughout the year, but 5080 volume could pick up near middle of quarter 4 or something, just to give you a data point of how long you might be waiting for that. And actually, I would say the same for the low end. At the low end, I think eventually RDNA 4 will push down low-end prices, but that might be a year from now. I don't see a near $300 7600 XT, $220 7600, or $190 6600 being nothing better coming out than those for at least a year. And even, unfortunately, again, I'm sorry, NVIDIA fans, the 4060 I would ignore at this point. I used to sometimes recommend it, if it was like $290 versus a $270, 7600, sure, pay the extra $20 for DLSS support, better ray tracing, better efficiency. Absolutely, I would recommend that. But once you start seeing like deals on 7600s towards $220 and 7600 XTs for like an extra $30 that have double the VRAM, which really matters. This isn't 12 to 24 gigabytes, this is 8 to 16. I just basically can't recommend almost any NVIDIA card this month. In fact, I've actually had some contacts of mine suggest that those low-end AMD graphics cards are barely being sold above cost right now. And, well, yeah, actually, on that note, that's a good segue. Speaking of Radeon cards not being sold with a lot of margin, that certainly turned up in AMD's earnings in quarter 1, didn't it? Well, just so you all know, I'm actually hearing there's much more to this than something simple like AMD selling less cards or not having a lot of margin specifically in that quarter. In fact, I do have to bring up Tech Epiphany again, which isn't all of the information, but is one data point that lines up with what I'm talking about today and what I've heard from other people besides Tech Epiphany. If you look at it, AMD is actually keeping decent do-it-yourself GPU market share. His numbers would suggest, and my contacts are directly telling me. So, well then, yeah, what's going on here? Well, there's a few things going on that contributed to AMD's gaming and semi-custom revenue looking so bad recently. And the first thing to highlight is that even if AMD is keeping do-it-yourself market share against NVIDIA, relatively speaking right now, their revenue is likely drastically lower per card sold than what NVIDIA is making. So that's a part of it. Although it must be pointed out that NVIDIA had sales go down quarter over quarter as well. So it's not like the GPU market isn't showing up as slumping for all companies right now, but just not remotely like what's going on with AMD. So what's going on? Well, yeah, like I said, lower revenue per card. Additionally, we do have to mention that Xbox sales are continuing to have a massive decline. That is semi-custom. Even PlayStation sales are maybe way better than Xbox, but they are down relatively speaking. So all of that is contributing to lower gaming revenue. We cannot overlook that. However, another factor in those disastrous gaming and semi-custom revenue that was reported by AMD in quarter 1 of this year is that AMD apparently has had this giant can of debt that they had been kicking down the road since the RX 6000 series that had been fueled by a credit rebate system with retailers that finally caught up with them. You see, one of my longest running and most trusted sources of mine in distribution reached out to me this week. They didn't want to be directly quoted, but they did give me the details and say it was okay for me to talk about how this works. Basically, this is how AMD's been operating with graphics cards, with retailers, since some point from the RDNA 2 RX 6000 series. And note that I'm going to use simple round numbers to make this easy to explain. Don't take this to be an exact breakdown of what the cost would be, but let's put it this way as an example. So let's say AMD sells a BOM kit to an AIB for $400. That's the basic kit to make a GPU. Then that AIB spends $50 on top of that $400 to put it all together, add a cooler, blah, blah, blah. And then that's $450 total. So they sell it to a retailer like Newegg or Micro Center or Best Buy or something. And then that retailer buys it from them for $500. Now, the AIB is happy. They made around 11% profit, and yay, they're happy. But then the retailer, why would a retailer buy a graphics card for $500 and then sell it for $500? Well, because then they would report to AMD immediately, we sold a graphics card, put us on for 1 credit, and then they do it every time they sold it, and then just every quarter, AMD would allot a certain amount of credits to retailers to get discounts on the next cards. That's why I've reported multiple times on this channel that day one sales for AIBs and retailers rarely make them much money. It's the sales that come after that, especially the heavily marked up super cooler versions. So you see how this works though, right? AMD is basically facilitating retailers having some amount of profit to sell their graphics cards. But that only really works if they sell a similar amount of cards every quarter, or at least a decent amount. If there's ever a quarter where sales go tremendously lower than the previous one, then the retailer comes due with all these credits from the previous quarter, and AMD isn't selling as many cards. Boom, massive, massive revenue drop, a bigger drop than you would usually see for a sales slump. That's what's going on. Of course, in addition to lower console sales, and of course just for a general GPU slump in general right now. And this was corroborated by multiple other sources that I spoke to. I won't say which ones that I listed today, but those same sources that gave me details. I asked them to look into this in the back end, and a couple of them, not all, but a couple of them were able to find the credit system and go, oh yeah, that is how this seems to work. And so I thought that would be interesting to tell you all. There you go. I guess the last thing that I would actually say about that is I am also told that NVIDIA, Intel, basically everybody does this, but that, well, Intel's earnings haven't looked good either, have they? And NVIDIA has just a lot more cash lying around and a lot more ways to like kind of funnel the money to hide it if it's going to look bad. Still sometimes looks a little bad, but they're able to hide it better. They're also just better at hiding it at NVIDIA. And I guess, well, there's one more thing to point out that I don't think this was planned or could have been planned anyway, but not many people talked about the bad gaming revenue. At least I didn't see a lot of analysts outside of gaming circles talk about it. And that's because it happened to happen on a quarter where AMD made record gains in client, and it seems poised to make a ton of money in data center this year due to AI and MI300. And so I have to be honest, though, this debt can AMD has been kicking down the road. It was always going to catch up with them at some point. At some point, there would be a GPU sales drop. And I bet they're actually pretty happy it happened during a quarter where they can say great things about client and project a lot of, uplift in revenue over the rest of the year. And so it's going to make it easier for them to show growth for the rest of this year because it happened in this quarter. So maybe they're at least a little happy that it happened this quarter and not one where they would have nothing good to report at all. And yeah, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, please remember to hit the like button, to give a comment below for the algorithm, and to discuss, below too. It really does help with other people what cards people should be shopping for right now or what cards they should be waiting for. And then, of course, please remember to support our sponsors if you're interested in their products, but most importantly, join the Moore's Law is Dead Patreon. You will get early ad-free access to Broken Silicon at the proper tier. All tiers get access to a back catalog of hundreds of Die Shrink episodes. A new one just came out. Another one will be coming out soon. And they're just hour-long, always ad-free, always exclusive videos for those people that support us for just $2 a month. And that also gets you access to a Discord and the ability to ask guest questions. So, yeah, we cannot do this without our patrons. This is what allows us to have a lot more confidence in being self-sufficient, to know that we don't always need sponsors to pay me, Dan, Gerard, Carbon crying Jean-Philippe, the entire Moore's Law is that team, multiple people that rely on this to put food on the table. But you know what? If you made it this far to the end of the video, no matter what though, thank you for watching.
NVIDIA has flooded the market. 11 of the first 16 GPUs on Newegg are NVIDIA GeForce cards. On Amazon, page 1 of the computer graphics card category shows 24 NVIDIA to only 10 AMD. At Micro Center, 77% of the first 96 GPUs listed are all NVIDIA. At Best Buy, there's more AMD representation up front, but the suggested GPU filters on the left are exclusively for the NVIDIA 40 series. Even Walmart has NVIDIA GPUs in 25 of its first page slots versus just 2 for AMD. 2. And most recently, AMD's own earnings report declared a 48% decline in its gaming-related segment sales, including Radeon graphics. And so we come back to that intro, which is that it feels like NVIDIA has flooded the market. And this is a feeling we've had for a while now, but we wanted to try and put some fact-based research behind it to see if it was just a bias from exposure or if that's actually true. And there's some obvious factors in there, like market share, but there's a lot of interesting data we could dig through to try and understand the grander strategy of both AMD and NVIDIA and do something different for us, which is ignore the performance and look at a whole lot of other numbers instead. Today we'll be talking about these charts we've painstakingly put together showing NVIDIA's launch cadence and the embattlement between AMD and NVIDIA. We'll also talk about the implications it has on AMD and Intel in the consumer GPU market. And because some of this is getting into sort of the marketing psychology, it's an imperfect collection of data. But we think there's enough here to try and better understand the story of what's happened in the GPU market. NVIDIA's stuffing the market with SKU upon SKU of video card to the point that retailers, it seems like, almost have to try to put AMD up there in any kind of balanced way with NVIDIA and with retailers. A lot of money exchanges hands too to even get those top slots. That's a whole different story for another time. And Intel obviously doesn't show up that much. Intel only really has one generation right now, whereas AMD's been there for, well, as long as it's been relevant, at least anytime recently. First, let's just see if the feeling that NVIDIA is more prevalent is valid beyond the obvious of market share. According to the Video Cards GPU database, there are 1,091 different partner cards for the NVIDIA GeForce 40 series alone versus a measly 162 variants for the AMD Radeon 7000 series. Even allowing for cataloging error or missing a couple, that gulf is massive. NVIDIA's 30 series had an even crazier 1,489 models versus 335 for AMD 6000 series. Now, a few of the entries on both sides are marked as having never launched. There's a couple that are kind of duplicates. There's a lot of them that are very small deviations in clock spec, for example. So the real number might be a little bit lower, but the fundamental point remains, which is that despite how many actual GPU SKUs exist, NVIDIA clearly has more partner presence. It's inarguable. It's just fact. The only thing that's up for debate is maybe the specific number. And that means it can flood the retail listings, even if it were to have fewer generational SKUs. We're going to use the phrase self-fulfilling prophecy a lot in this piece because that's what this is. They sell more, so it makes sense that partners would make more versions of the card that sells more. They can segment it more. They can try to add different features to compete with the other partners who are flooding the market in their own way. But even beyond this, there's just something about NVIDIA's presence in the market and in the PC space in particular for DIY where it makes it feel like NVIDIA is involved at every step of the way. And media is a part of that, which means that we have unique insights to it. We're part of the media covering NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, and everyone else. So we decided to collate every embargo we could remember for both AMD and NVIDIA for its most recent GPU launches. Went through emails, pulled all the official press correspondence, the sort of special advance emails we get about a new product coming out, and we pulled out the release dates and the embargo dates. Now, we're not sure if we got every single one, but after scouring the inbox, this is what we came up with. NVIDIA had about 19 separate embargoes for its RTX 40 launches, depending on how you count the canceled embargoes and the unlaunched video card. These 19 or so embargoes surrounded 9 products. So again, AMD had about 10 embargoes, 9 without the GRE, and 8 if you ignore the canceled 7600 unboxing embargo. So these 8 to 10 surround 7 products, or in other words, as a ratio, NVIDIA averaged 2.1 news or review embargoes per product, while AMD averaged between 1.14 and 1.4 per product. None of this is inherently evil or untoward, but it does tell us about the strategy of the two companies, where NVIDIA has clearly determined that whether or not the world agrees with it, its information is interesting enough that it can disseminate it across a longer time scale, across just as many or pretty close to as many products, and it does so carefully enough that it's able to warrant additional separate releases of information. Now, this is key because in media, for us to even consider a secondary embargo for a similar product, there has to be something significant. So again, even without the partner embargoes, NVIDIA is slowing its outflow of information to spread over multiple events and span a longer length of time. AMD seems to more regularly combine multiple products or announcements into one embargo. You can see that in our table. This is a key strategic difference. And so by spanning a longer stretch of time, NVIDIA is able to get repeat exposure and build familiarity with its brand and with that new generation of products. And this is important because the familiarity is a key marketing play that kind of gets at the roots of human psychology. Now, we're not psychologists, but one part of this is called the mere exposure effect. In general terms, the more a person is exposed to something, the more familiar they are with it. Makes sense. But what's interesting is it also suggests that the more they like it. The Wikipedia entry says, quote, "In the advertising world, the mere exposure effect suggests that consumers need not think about advertisements. Simple repetition is enough to make a memory trace in the consumer's mind and unconsciously affect their consuming behavior," end quote. So it does seem like the mere exposure effect is a thing that can be leveraged in selling a product. And in this capacity, NVIDIA is targeting that angle of marketing seemingly more than AMD. But that exposure goes beyond the news cycle, and it does become sort of a perpetual motion machine. For starters, there are literally just more NVIDIA cards out there in use. The Steam hardware survey isn't the perfect data tool, nothing in here really is, but it's useful for this. Adding together the percent share of the top 10 DX12 GPUs from each NVIDIA and AMD gives us 36% for NVIDIA and only 6% for AMD. Zooming out to the entire data set puts NVIDIA at about 77% market share and AMD at about 16%. If you don't like Steam hardware survey, there's also John Petty Research, or JPR, which recently had NVIDIA 80% market share for DGPUs in Q2 of 2023 and AMD at 17%. No matter which way you count it, the ratio is extremely in NVIDIA's favor. And this phenomenon of more exposure in general doesn't exist only on YouTube and Steam, of course, because you also see it at places like retailers. Most customers buy NVIDIA cards in general, which naturally makes the retailer stock more of what customers want, whether they're digital or physical. This leads to reinforcing the purchasing bias. If an undecided or uninformed customer walks into a store or goes online to buy a GPU, and they see a wall of green boxes but only